Mike Owens with Inside Fire here, joined today by the main man, Luke Thomas, who's kind enough to give me some of his time to break down UFC 308, and more specifically, Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway for the UFC featherweight title. Luke, always a pleasure, my man. How are things with you today?
I'm all right. Thank you for having me.
What is your level of excitement for UFC 308 as an overall card?
That's a good one. Probably a 9 or a 10 out of 10. I mean, I don't get much more hyped than I am for this one. Unfortunately, some work projects have prevented me from doing the kind of work that I wanted to prepare for this fight. But just in terms of, I am still a fan of the sport.
Hmm.
Just in terms of that, I always say this to people. Like again, we're speaking now a few days out from the event. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
Everything gets to the fights itself, and then may the best man win. Nothing gets in the way of that, right?
Mm.
So, as we're speaking today, I genuinely just don't know what you would want if you're a fan and you're looking at this card and you're saying to yourself, I don't get enough, with one exception. If your exception was, hey, this particular card, for as good as all the quality is, doesn't quite capture the big fight feel because it's not, if you were from the UK, it's not in London, or it's not in New York, it's not in
Mm.
Vegas, it's kind of in Abu Dhabi, which is, or the UAE anyway, and it feels a little distant, quite literally. Okay, fair enough, I'm open to that argument. But if you're examining the quality of the matchup, if you're examining the significance, both historically and presently, about what the stakes are and what the results could mean,
Mm.
I, I don't know where I don't know what else you would want. This is literally, in the main event, the very best fight that MMA can make. The co-main event is arguably one of the very best non-title fights that the UFC can make, because right, it neither Khamzat nor Rob has the title,
Mm.
and not everything down the line is great, but just on those two alone, plus there's another number one contender fight, also on that main card. This is what you want the UFC to do. This is what the UFC, by the way, is uniquely situated to do.
Mm.
And so, therefore, this is the kind of thing you would expect from them. They're delivering big. I'm happy to criticize them when they deserve it, but you got to give them their props when they do it right. This is doing it right.
I think you've been very vocal on your own show about the Topuria versus Holloway as your most anticipated fight. Probably certainly for the rest of the year, but certainly for a long time prior to that as well. Why is this fight particularly, if that is correct, why is this fight your most anticipated?
Yeah, it definitely is my most anticipated. For 2023, it was Spence Crawford in boxing,
Mm.
and right now it's this one. Um, okay, so this is pretty simple. It's a couple of different reasons. Let's start on the Topuria side. I don't know how he comes across to UK audiences, but in the United States, the American fans have been a little bit slow, if not hostile,
Mm.
to Topuria, in part because he beat one of their favorite fighters, which I understand, but also because, and I've said this a million times, if I don't know how he sounds in Georgian, but he sounds like a different person in Spanish. It's a
Mm.
completely unique thing. And the way he comes across in English just doesn't resonate with fans. They see him as a try hard. They see him as a guy who's in love with himself, who, just really has the kind of ego and not the same kind of like connection to the fans. He seems somewhat distant as well. And so it just hasn't resonated. But if you put that aside, you just actually watch what he's doing in the cage. He is one of the most electric talents in all of MMA. A guy who is young, already a champion, who has a natural ability on the ground, black belt jiu-jitsu, also maybe the best boxer in MMA, dynamite, blinding power, complete self-confidence, not a lot of miles on him at all. This is what you're looking for with the next kind of wave of talent in MMA. This is the guy.
Mm.
He's the leader of that pack as far as I'm concerned. Then on the other side you have Max Holloway, who is one of the most decorated champions that featherweight has ever had. Stopped Jose Aldo in back-to-back fights, which is just like an outrageous achievement when you think of
Mm.
all
Yeah.
Jose Aldo's been able to do in his
Mhm.
career. Who was left for dead on the side of the road because he couldn't beat a prime peak Volkanovski, who at the time was the pound for pound best guy in the world. That fight, the third fight between them at UFC 276, really solidified Volkanovski as the best guy in the world.
Yeah.
But then a funny thing happened along the way. Max simply refused to give in, beating Arnold Allen, beating Yair Rodriguez, beating Korean Zombie, and you can go on down the list, culminating in a fight up a weight class against a guy who was a known punisher, and Max turned in, without exaggeration, one of the greatest knockouts in UFC
Mm.
history. Now Max finds himself back in title contention, which seemed unfathomable after losing to Volkanovski at UFC 276, against one of the most preeminent surging talents the entire sport has to offer. Both of them, by the way, are very likely to strike it out. You might get some mixing of the martial arts, but it's certainly going to be predominantly a striking contest. Where the results are so important, I think, one, if Topuria wins, this will catapult him into the stratosphere of next level must-see talents in the sport from a box office standpoint. And then number two, really you have to reconsider if Max beats Ilia, you have to reconsider the ranking of all-time best featherweights with it. It's a monumentally important fight, a monumentally interesting contest. Again, what else are people looking for?
Yeah. No. UFC 308 is this weekend. Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway for the UFC featherweight title. And we have an incredible new offer from our partners at DraftKings. Right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly receive $200 in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app right now and sign up using our promo code INSIDEFIGHTING. The crown is yours.
For.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think a point you mentioned there I wanted to pick up on is the status of both men. Ilia Topuria, an ever confident fighter, becomes world champion, and we often hear, I believe it was Teddy Atlas who coined the phrase, a champion gains 20%, a fight against 20% by becoming world champion. On the flip side, we have Max Holloway, who throughout his career, and most specifically in his last fight against Justin Gaethje, performs arguably the greatest when his back is against the wall and when people doubt him. I mean, you think about a fight you never mentioned, but the Calvin Kattar fight, where people were saying that Max, after losing the first two Volkanovski fights, should retire. That was an actual thing that people were saying. Do you feel like the position of either fighter, should Topuria as champion or Holloway as challenger, do you feel like that will have an effect on the fight at all?
In what sense?
In terms of it will elevate either man's performance. So
yeah. So yes. So in the case of Topuria, he's got a very dangerous kind of confidence, and here's what I mean. Let's assume he beats Max. He's got the kind of confidence that's going to turn into probably a sense of I'm invincible and get him into trouble down the line. I actually kind of see that in him. However, he's also got the kind of confidence because he's undefeated, right? He's undefeated and he's beaten good guys, but he certainly doesn't have like the resume that Max does or the time in the trenches. But I actually think in the short term, it's going to really boost his confidence. And if things do go tough, I don't think he's going to fold very easily, right? I think he's actually going to put it on people. So I think it's one of those things where over the long term, I could see it metastasizing, but in the present sense, lifting him. And some of that comes from being champion. In the case of Max, I think he's more centered, but I also think he realizes, one, this is such a unique opportunity. If you lose your UFC title, I mean, you know this, the stats are basically that you're never going to get it back. And the longer that the time expands between when you lose it and when you pick it up, the harder it becomes, or try to pick it up anyway, the harder it becomes to do. But coming off of that knockout win over Justin Gaethje at 55 and all the different ways in which he's elevated his game, I think he feels like the wind is at his back too. Plus, he can feel that the fans don't really respond to Topuria. They really respond to Max. They're kind of looking to Max in a way to like, hey, put this guy away for us. And I suspect he picks up on that. Max is smart and Max is observant. So I really believe both guys are going into this one sober. Don't misunderstand me, but definitely feeling like, oh, I've got the advantage. This is my moment. Look what's been happening to bring me to this present situation.
From a technical kind of X's and O's standpoint, what would you say are one thing that both Ilia and Max need to do to have success in this matchup?
The first thing I would say is this: they have to, like, I really believe this, whoever really establishes their jab is probably going to win. Now, Max might be more consistent with the jab, but that doesn't necessarily mean he'll be the one who is decisively dictating the results of that, although that could be the case as well. But I have to tell you, the thing I consider to be the most important, and the jab is really like hand in hand with this, but I just want folks to pay attention to something, is really the spatial location of all of this. I've been talking to some MMA coaches, and one of the things they've been kind of harping on is if you look at all of Ilia's finishes, a lot of them happen behind the black line where the advertisement is, which is pretty common. Like even Volkanovski, even the great Volkanovski ended up back there. So it's not like he's not good at putting people back there,
Yeah.
right? It's not some accident.
Yeah.
However, Max is good at moving. Max is good at pivoting. Max is good at stance switching through movement. Max is good at angling off, turning. He's not heavy on the back foot in terms of lateral movement, but he'll do a little bit of that as well. That's going to make him harder to hit. Conversely, I think Ilia Topuria's defensive movement is good as well, but can he be lured into traps on that heavy on the front foot? Because like you basically know he's going to try and march into you.
Yeah.
And so I really believe the jab, yes, but whoever can control for the, what do you want to use? The real estate around them. And this is true in a lot of MMA fights, but it's really true in this one, where you've got two good guys that are going to be both hard to hurt, but they're going to be hard to land something significant on unless one makes a big error. How each one decides to solve for the geography of the other one is critical in this bout. So look, just see who's moving in what ways, and it will kind of tell you who's got the upper hand.
There's been a lot of talk in the build-up. I mean, I know that will have likely seen the face-to-face they did with Brendan Fitzgerald a couple of weeks back about pointing to the ground and swinging it out in kind of Max's, you know, iconic way that he does at the end of the fight. Really is kind of positioning it as something to what he wants to do with the first 10 seconds rather than the last 10 seconds. If you were a betting man, who would you say is more likely to point to the ground first?
Ilya, just because of these mind games, but these are stupid. I hate this
I
whole
know you
thing.
do.
If I could be honest with you, like
Mm.
it's like someone even said, "Hey, what if Ilya?" Someone asked me this. What if Ilya did point to the ground? Max obliged him, and then one of them gets knocked out. It doesn't even matter who. It's like, would that not be? I mean, yes, if you're a fan of one guy and your guy wins, okay, but like independent of that, like you just want to see a great fight. Wouldn't that be terribly disappointing? Like,
It would. Yeah.
like imagine if Max lost, for example. Max like obliged and then got viciously KO'd in 10 seconds. It's like, dude, this was your chance to get your belt back. This was your chance to make good
Mm.
on this, and you threw it away doing this dumb shit. You know what
Mm.
I mean? Like it would be totally, or in the case of Ilya, this was your first title defense, and you threw it away.
Yeah, that's a good
Like,
point.
who on earth wants to see that? If they want to wait till the last 10 seconds of a 25 or 24-minute, 50-second bout, and then the last 10 seconds go for a sprint, even that is reckless. But okay, I can at least stomach that, right? I mean, it's whatever, it's fine. But I would be extremely pissed off if they actually did that at the beginning and then obliged one another. I really hope that it doesn't even come to that. I don't think that it will, but I actually hate this whole thing.
Yeah. Okay. Likewise, I kind of agree the way you framed that. Another question I've had for you, and I don't think I've seen anyone speak about this yet. In what ways do you feel like this fight has an effect on the pound for pound rankings? Now, I'm conscious that that depends on the actual result, i.e., Ilya winning by a split decision is a lot different than Ilya winning by first round KO and how that can affect things. But in terms of victory for either man, do you think that has an effect on the top end of the pound for pound rankings?
I don't see how it doesn't. I'm not saying that the winner doesn't end up in pound for pound number one. That's because again, that's what you did recently. Okay,
Mm.
that would be that, but also like the overall body of work, the overall body of work in 2023. Um, but like this is something that I had to reconcile with following Spence Crawford, for
Mm.
example, in
Okay.
2023. I was talking to Stephen Breadman Edwards. If you're an MMA fan, you probably don't know who that is. He's
Mm.
a longtime boxing trainer. He trains Caleb Plant and many other guys. And one thing I was able to call some fights with him, and one thing he was able to tell me, or we were talking about, was if you go back and you watch that fight, like Bud Crawford destroyed Errol Spence, like destroyed. And both of them were on the pound for pound list. And there was a conversation. It's like, one, if you're Bud and you beat another pound for pound guy like that, right? Like thoroughly, you unified all the titles and you just like smashed this guy. You deserve a huge bump. Like that it really, really goes to your favor. And
Yeah.
then conversely, if you were Errol Spence, his argument was it's hard to keep you inside the top 10 pound for pound if you lose that badly,
Yeah.
even to another. You can't be a pound for pound guy and get smashed like that.
Mm.
So the win or a loss will probably have some effect. I think what I'm more looking for is one guy able to be really dominant here? Because if you're dominant and you're Max, this has to do a dramatic boost for you. And I'm not exactly sure where Ilya is in the rankings pound for pound, but wherever he is, if he were to, let's imagine, again, I'm just positing a
Mm.
scenario. If he were to KO Max Holloway, dude, like
Yeah.
you're doing something that literally dozens of some of the best fighters in the world, in the fucking history of the sport,
Mm.
have been unable to do. Yeah, that would boost you significantly in the pound for pound rankings.
Yeah, 100%. Let's quickly switch the conversation to the co-main event. Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev. I feel a little bit like, relative to where this fight was in June, the kind of rebooking of it post Ikram Aliskerov win for Robert Whittaker. I feel like it's flown under the radar a little bit, and it maybe hasn't had the hype or the kind of promotion that it maybe necessarily deserves. Have you felt like that? Like it's been one of those that's kind of snuck up on us a little bit?
I do. I think that Hamzat has had obviously the difficulties we know in getting back. When the fight fell out in Saudi Arabia, I think that that burned a lot of interest in it. And in fact, when they rebooked it, I remember people being like, "Why?
Mm,
Why would you even rebook this?"
yeah.
And it did damage to it. Not that people aren't excited per se. If you actually ask them about it, they're like, "Oh yeah, it's pretty cool." But like
Mm,
to your point, the fact that it's not front of mind in the way that it was, I really think is a result of all of the other issues Hamzat has had, and then in particular the Saudi Arabian version of this fight
mm,
falling through last minute. So there's definitely that. Also, some of the hype's been taken out, I think, because it seems like the UFC has decided that Sean Strickland versus DDP 2 is going to be the next move for the title, no matter what. Whereas I kind of felt like, personally, I would have liked to have seen what the result was and how it was achieved in this bout before we made that call.
mm,
But the other part too is like, dude, Hamzat's got a different kind of energy this week, right?
yeah.
He grew his hair out. He's always been somewhat soft spoken in certain ways, but then you have these like aggro moments. But now you're not seeing any of the aggro moments. You're just seeing a lot of the soft spoken thing. And I actually think that's better. I think that will make him a better fighter if it means that he is not consumed with like these fits of rage that he wants to fight on in the way he did against Gilbert Burns, where like that burns hot and then it burns out. And then you're like, well, what are you going to do now?
Mm.
So all of those factors combined have taken some of the steam off of it. However, I just say as a personal matter, this fight is again one of the best fights the UFC can make between two non-title holders, independent of weight class.
100%. I mean, point you mentioned there about Hamzat, I kind of wanted to pick up on because when you look at his initial rise, I feel like what was the beauty of Hamzat's rise was there was so many. Every fight gave us more questions than answers. Like on his initial rise, he was finishing people so quickly that the question was what happened when someone didn't go away so early. We learned a lot in the Gilbert Burns fight, but then there was a lot of questions opened up about that. And then the controversy around the short notice Kevin Holland fight and then the short notice Kamaru Usman fight raised similar questions. How much do you feel like skill set wise we still have left to learn about Khamzat Chimaev?
A ton, a ton. He's 30, so he should be close to the peak of his powers. But because he's been so inconsistent of late, it's really hard to know. That's the
Mm,
first thing I'd say as a general rule. Second, and this to me might be the most like decisive factor in the fight. Would it at all surprise you if he went out there and physically dominated Robert Whittaker for a round and a half, maybe, and then
mm.
began to fade? And as that fight goes into the third, and I believe this is a 5 round
It is
fight,
a
if I'm
five
not
round fight.
mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, dude, what does Hamzat look like in the fourth and fifth round against a guy like Robert Whittaker? We have no clue.
Mm,
We simply have no clue. But the things that we do know about how he's performed previously give us serious pause about that. So that's a huge question. That's honestly a bit of a fight IQ question too. People want to
mm.
make it to be a cardio issue. Yes, it can be, but for most guys, there are guys like Marab where they can just fight a million miles an hour for as long as the fight lasts, but that's pretty rare. Most guys, even in really good shape, still have to think strategically about how much offense they apportion at any one given time. And he just looked like he neglected all those questions. That's a fight IQ question. It just is. So we'll see how he solves for that. But the other part too, like this is something that I really think people miss. A lot of times people don't come around to a fighter until they become champion. And
Mm,
even then, like look at Topuria, people are still not sold, right? But I actually really disagree with that. I really think that the most interesting time in a fighter's career is before they become champion, or at least it's as equally interesting to me as their championship run,
mm.
because this is to the point that you raised. This is when they are making you reimagine what's possible every single
Yeah.
time they go out there. But that usually happens on a steady drumbeat, like it did for Hamzat, or when I watched John Jones's ascension. It
Mm,
was a steady drumbeat of
mm.
ascension. And again, that was pretty quick too, but it was still like, holy crap, he's doing this to that guy.
Yeah.
Hamzat got a taste of that, and then it all went away. And in part, that has hurt his promotional status, but to the point that you raise, it also makes us wonder, where are you in your overall technical development? Where are you in terms of, is his ground game good and attacks from the back and his wrist rides and all that stuff? Is all that good? Yes. Does he have good power? Yes. But we've already known all that stuff. How are you putting it all together in a cohesive, appropriately apportioned game plan to beat these guys? Dude, we don't know. We literally don't know. And the reason I bring that up is, do you know what the answer is if we were to ask those same questions about Robert Whittaker's game? Yes, you do.
Yeah.
You have a very clear sense. I mean, what he'll do in this fight, we'll see. But like, can he apportion offense over 5 rounds? Yes. Is he well-rounded? Yes. Do you have a clear sense of his striking style? Yes. Do you have a clear sense of his offensive and defensive grappling capabilities? Yes. So these are things that you have almost no ability to answer, or at least over a 5-round contest for Khamzat, and you're fully good answers in the case of Robert, and the contrast is stunning.
Talking about Robert, did his last performance against Ikram Aliskerov change your opinion, or certainly let you reimagine what is left for him in terms of title opportunities? How much did that fight kind of change your opinion of where Robert Whittaker's at?
Not exactly, because the fight with Paulo Costa I thought was fine for him, but not like crazy remarkable. I mean, the thing I think for Robert is he's basically maximized his skill level and his technical development, which is elite. I mean, there's no question. When I say it's limited, I don't mean like limited bad. I mean like he's up against like the genetic potential of what is even possible, right? So there's that. The thing that I come back to that I do think is in Khamzat's favor is that you go back and you watch that DDP fight, right? I mean, how did he get Robert to the ground that one time? He basically just sagged his weight and got him down. And then he used something called like a Tozy or a Sao Paulo pass, which is, I mean, there's different kinds of passes, but one of the sort of the two big binary ways is there's a mobile pass, like a Toriando pass. You just move their legs to the side. Or there's like smash pass, where you really kind of contort their body in a painful way that forces them to move in a way that gives you the pass. That's what that was. Like he had a hard nose grinding pass. It's like, dude, that's like tailor-made for Khamzat. Tailor-made. And so it's not a question of like, is Robert up to it on a skill level? I think he is. And there are huge questions about Khamzat, but does Khamzat, in theory, we think, have the kind of physical tools and the physical style in your face to give Robert some problems? Yes. Whether he will do that, I again, I don't know. I simply don't know.
Last question from me, Luke, and thank you as always for your time. Which fighter, which fight, or which storyline is capturing you most past the main and co-main on the rest of the UFC three?
You could go in a lot of different directions. Yeah, I've seen people talk about the Shara Bullet fight. I'm not sold on him at all, but honestly, it's got to be the Rakic and Ankalaev fight. Partly because Rakic is a physical specimen and he's limited, but folks forget he was beating the brakes off of Yuri at UFC 300 before. You know, Yuri has no defense, but he's got resiliency, and that was enough in that contest, quite clearly. But more to the point, like Ankalaev should be winning these fights. Ankalaev should be this guy. And remember, the winner of this is going to fight Poatan. So, you know, one of the most electric, speaking of an electric talent, there's one right there, or maybe the most electric talent in the sport, depending on your perspective. Winner of that's going to get that guy. And by the way, if it's Ankalaev and he can show like good wrestling throughout this contest, you're like, okay, man, we got something cooking here at 205, because 205 sucks right now. It's not a great division at all. No. It's got some good fighters in it, and I consider this to be one of the more noteworthy and important matchups. But in general, down to 10 to 15, it's really not a strong division. This one to me is super interesting. Curious to see what happens.
Just to finish, because a point you raised a second ago, why are you not sold on Shara Bullet? What is the kind of what's the disconnect there between maybe yourself and some of the hype from the fans?
Let me be clear. He's obviously good, right? It's not a question of like, is he some fraud? I don't think he's a fraud. I mean, that seems like way over the top. That's not what I'm saying. He's good. He's good. He'll beat some good guys. But I've noticed, man, that there's a lot of dudes, a lot of fighters who come into the organization these days, and they come in with some hype that to me is really undeserved. I mean, it should tell you a lot that Volkanovski didn't even have hype after he beat Jose Aldo, much less before it. He didn't have much hype when he beat Chad Mendes, much less before it. It took a long time for folks to realize, oh, this fucking guy's really good. Ilia Topuria, there's still folks in denial about how good he is, and look at how much he's achieved. I remember everyone was on the Khamzat hype train before anyone even noticed. I'm like, yo, you see this guy Shavkat Rakhmonov? I was
Yeah.
high on him long before the public realized, oh wait, he's pretty good. So I've just noticed that it's not always true because, for example, Conor McGregor came into the UFC with hype from Cage Warriors. That was deserved hype, and then he lived up to it. This is not an argument that there's always an inverse,
Mm.
but be careful about guys who have hype coming into the UFC, and then you watch them, and then you're like, they don't really quite pass the smell test. His ground game is, to me, very suspect, and even for the stuff he's good at, the striking part, some of his decision making on when to use those tools at what ranges has not been impressive to me at all.
Mm.
So I'm not saying he should beat Petrosian, right? Should be, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he does. I think Petrosian has the possibility of doing that in a real way.
Mm.
Again, Bullet should win, but like, same thing with Raul Rosas Jr. Oh my God, this guy's a grappling prodigy. He's going to be champion by the age of 21. No, he's not.
Mm.
Like, no, he's not. Like, that hype is absurd. That hype is insane. There's nothing on tape that should ever make you say anything like that. Now, his situation's different because he's young, right? He's young, and he can kind of go piece by piece, step by step. And every time I see him, he's definitely taking a step in the right direction. So all that's great, but like, he's a grappling prodigy, not on this planet. Maybe another one, but not on planet Earth. And same thing with Shara. You need to beat good guys much more impressively and decisively before we can start anointing this guy as like some future amazing great. He's good. Let's leave it at that until he shows us more.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Luke, thank you so much for the time as always. Really do appreciate it. I always enjoy breaking down these cards with you and getting some of your knowledge. Thank you as always. I look forward to the next one.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.